Well, welcome back, y'all. Another episode of The Narrative. No, hit that intro. This week's narrative. Just because a player has an bad analytical profile, it means they're going to be a bust. And I want to talk about this because I've seen it around on Twitter. My good friend at DF Bean Counter, Drew, has been fighting the good fight on the analytics front against all of these film grinders that come out of the woodworks because because he said Devonta Smith has a low odd of hitting, and people got big mad. And people got big mad. They're like, "Oh, well, you analysts don't know anything." Like, some guy named like MVS Scouting. I don't know who the
He
fuck he
named
is.
his account
This
after
first time I ever,
Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
yeah,
That should tell you enough.
yeah, he has Scouting his name, so he's probably legit. Maybe not. I don't fucking know, man. He got big mad on Drew, started like throwing names and being like, "Oh, you nerds don't know what you're talking about." Like, look, I want to set the record straight. As someone who does rely on analytics, but also bridges the gap with film, analytics is a tool in the toolbox. It is not meant as a mean all to an end to like basically tell you exactly what's gonna happen. Like when we say from an analytical perspective, you should fade this player, it does not mean they stink because they're in college, they produce, they're gonna get drafted. Presumably they have some talent, right? Well, the only thing that we're trying to say is like if you look at history, guys that have that type of profile, like let's take Devonta Smith for example. And I know there's gonna be a bunch of big mad people. I'll talk about this in the comments, but the reason why he's not a high likelihood of succeeding is because he's tiny. He's really small, right? I don't really care about that as much, but
Mike,
that's one of
size
the
doesn't
reasons.
matter, man.
Stop the cap. Stop the cap right now. Stop the cap. No bullshit, bro.
Two, he has a mediocre to average breakout age. He didn't really do anything until his junior year, and history tells us that the more you produce early on, the better. And then three, he really blew up in his senior year, which is the year that you should discount the most because at that point you're like the oldest guy on campus with the most experience, and you're beating on people much younger than you, which is like the flip side of when you're young and you break out. You're like the youngest guy, and you step on the field and produce right away against basically grown ass men, right? And like if you just think about that logically, it makes sense. So, and then on top of that, he's not an early declare, which usually means the NFL looked at him and said, "Hey, like we're not going to draft you that high, so you probably shouldn't come out." And he went back and he balled out. Of course, he balled out. He proved himself. And like I think anyone with eyeballs can tell you that Devonta Smith is a good player, right? I can tell you that Devonta Smith is a good player. Noah can tell you that. Nick can tell you that. When even last year, if he came out last year, I would have liked him a lot more because that would mean that the NFL teams also said, "Hey, we don't care that you're small. We can see that you're a really good player, and we're going to give you opportunity." That's what we would have liked to see from an analytical perspective. But that does not mean that Devonta Smith stinks or he's going to fail absolutely. That's not what that means. The reason why someone like Drew and someone like me is going to rank a Jamar Chase ahead of him is because we see that he's good, but we see that there are also other really good players in this class, like a Jamar Chase, who has checked all those boxes at a younger age, been incredibly productive at a younger age, and has the tools and has the size and has the tackle breaking ability to be successful in the NFL. That's why, like, when I look at that decision, it's like, hey, I have two really good guys. One has some red flags, one doesn't. I'm always going to take the guy that doesn't, right? And Noah, you might take Devonta Smith first, and that's because you have a film experience, and you say, "Hey, this is the best guy I've seen." Like if I look at him, I look at Jamar Chase. I am sure, based on my film knowledge and my work that I've done, he is better than Jamar Chase, and I'm willing to take that risk, and that's fine, right? That's all that means. Like so, never take analytics for gospel. Anyone that does analytics knows this, right? When we tell you something, it's always based on odds and percentage of outcome and range of outcomes. It's never absolutes, regardless of what Twitter drones want you to do. People always stand on hills and are so sure of themselves. But like there is a range of outcomes for every single player. We need to understand that. And there's a different probability assigned to each of those outcomes. So when it comes to analytics, that's what it is. And I want to cover it this week because there's like so much back and forth with like all these fucking film grinders that like honestly, like I tweeted this before, like trying to explain like grade school math on Twitter makes me lose brain cells. Next time I'm just gonna pick up a fucking bottle of Jack Daniels and just smash that because it's the same result of my net brain cells, but it's way more enjoyable than trying to explain fucking elementary math to some of these dudes because it is honestly like tilting. But it's not the absolute, right? Analytics is not the absolute. It's just a tool. Like Noah, like do you in your current state, do you think Devonta Smith is your wide receiver one? Have you done film analysis on Jamar Chase? Like where do you land on that decision tree?
All right, Mike. Neither of them are my wide receiver one right now. I fucking love Rashad Bateman. I think he is
Okay,
fantastic.
okay.
But I do think, you make a lot of great points, and I don't completely, I do agree with what you're saying, right? Because there's not much to disagree with, right? Analytics is just a piece of the puzzle to help you hit on a player. I think a good example would be this past year, right? Henry Ruggs routinely going like 110 to 112. Same with Justin Jefferson. I think the breaking point there, and you watch both guys on tape. If you liked Henry Ruggs, you probably also really like Justin Jefferson because he was just as good and actually way better. But if you like Ruggs' film, you had to have liked Justin Jefferson's film. And the main separating point, because they were still both athletic, was the fact that Justin Jefferson had a really good analytical profile. So if you were still taking Ruggs ahead of Justin Jefferson, that's fine. If you really liked what he looked like on tape, that's fine. But you missed because of it. And I think a guy like Devonta Smith too, because Henry Ruggs never really broke out, and he was always being outproduced by his teammates. The fact that Devonta Smith, even in his second year, had a pretty good season. His third year, he was better than Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs, and he competed with a lot of other NFL caliber talent. I think that speaks to his talent as well. But you bring up great points, right? If he was as highly coveted of a player as he is now, he would have probably declared last year, unless he went out knowing he was going to win the Heisman this year and going to set records. There's really no reason, unless he wanted his degree, which he could do later. There's really no reason to go back for your senior season. He probably made himself a whole lot of money, but it also probably means that last year, if he came out, he would have been a second round pick, maybe even a third round pick. We saw guys like T. Higgins fall into the second. So I think he maybe went back to improve his draft stock and showed that he can be an alpha and produce by himself on the field. But he also kind of benefit this year by Jalen Waddle going down after 4 games, right? Jalen Waddle was going absolutely berserk, 120 yards in every single game. Then he gets hurt in the first play of the 5th game, I think, against Tennessee. But going back to your question, between Jamar Chase and between Devonta Smith, what's going to come down to me is, Jamar Chase obviously has the analytical profile. He broke out as a sophomore. He kind of reminds me of a guy like DJ Moore, who, he's not a separation guy, but he's really good with the ball in his hands. And he didn't separate at all as a sophomore, but he got 1,780 yards and 20 touchdowns. So he had to be doing something right. The thing about Devonta Smith too is, like, you play in the SEC, you face physical coverage. It's the most physical conference in the NCAA, and the fact that he's 175 pounds, continuing to dominate, and we'll see what he does against Ohio State, another good defense that isn't in the SEC. We'll see what he does there. I have no doubts he's going to do really well because he's looked really good. To me, he checks every box except for the analytical box. And as I look more into the tape between a guy like Jamar Chase and a Devonta Smith, what doesn't come down to me is the landing spot and seeing who has a quicker and better path to touches. If Jamar Chase lands in like Philadelphia and Devonta Smith lands in, I don't know, like the Raiders or some bullshit, I'll probably still take Jamar Chase over him, even if I like Devonta Smith's tape better. I do take everything into consideration when evaluating these guys. I'm not solely on the film side, and I'm not going to be, I do go on Twitter and I kind of throw out like shit about Devonta Smith's weight just because I like to start arguments when I really don't give a shit at the end of the day. But I do take everything into context, and I'm not going to completely die on the hill of a Devonta Smith just because I like what I see on tape, because I do understand that he was being outproduced by Jalen Waddle when Waddle was a freshman. He was a sophomore, and he was going to be drafted behind a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who hasn't done much in the NFL, and the same with Henry Ruggs. So there are definitely those concerns there, and that's why I'm just going to die on the hill of Rashad Bateman, because he checks every single box, and I like the way he plays as well. So it is a tough debate to have, and I think as we go on in the offseason, we'll look more into the tape, we'll look more into the numbers, and we'll kind of break it down for you guys as well. But that's just where I'm at with it right now. I would probably take Chase ahead of Devonta Smith right now, just because there are less red flags there. And in the first round, you want to mitigate risk and you want to take more high upside players that also have a really high floor. And I think that's where Chase provides for you as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it, man. Like if you go understand all this stuff, right? You understand the analytics, and at the end of the day, you still say, "Hey, I don't give a shit about analytics here because I've studied the film. I trust my process, and Devonta Smith is that dude. Draft him. Just know that that's the risk you take, and no one's gonna tell you like, hey, he's gonna be no one's gonna say like, hey, for sure he is a bust. All we're saying is, hey, you're taking on that risk, and you can always take on that risk, and it can work out. It can absolutely work out.
I also want to bring up this example, Mike. If 2019, N'Keal Harry and like DK Metcalf didn't have the most overwhelming analytical profile, but we saw he was athletic and we saw he could produce and he was really good at one thing. Whereas N'Keal Harry was a versatile guy who had a really good profile. If you said, I'll take DK Metcalf over N'Keal Harry, some people may laugh at you, but you're like, if you really believe in the tape there and you think he has the tools necessary to succeed at the next level, it might look bad at the time, but in retrospect, that was the right take. Not saying that's going to happen with these two guys, but it's not always the wrong thing to be steadfast in your opinion and believe what you see with your eyes. And it's also, on the flip side, not always bad to bet on analytics because it's a safer draw.
Yeah, it's just your process. Just understand, but don't ignore it. Like that's the thing that like that makes me weird is because like I'm an analytics guy. I'm a nerd, right? I can play with numbers, and to me, honestly, that's easier than film grinding because I think film grinding is a very tireless job, and it takes way more time. It takes a much more understanding of the game than it does for analytics. I think any film grinder can do the analytics side, but I don't think every analytics guy can do film grinding, and that's why it's like I draw the comparison of like it's almost like engineers versus business people. Like if you start off as an engineer, you can always go into business later, get an MBA. It's super fucking easy. But if you start off with a business degree, it's very hard to go back and do engineering. And that's kind of how I view film versus analytics. So just don't be that film grinder that willingly gives up that edge. Just don't like if you want to take that information in and still make your call off of that, no problems with it. So that's totally cool. But don't be the guy that's like, yeah, I'm just gonna ignore this data that is proven to give me better hit rates because I want to trust my eyes.
Yeah. Don't be Mike Mayock and draft guys because they're fast. And don't be John Elway and draft quarterbacks because they're white. Just like take everything into context and understand the player that you're going to draft. And, always just try to mitigate risk if you're paying the iron price for a player.
Yep. That's it. That's all we got for you guys. If you like, make sure you smash the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, and check out all the other film that we're launching this week and every week thereafter. We'll be back at you again next week with another narrative and much more.